take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. Can you hear freedom calling, calling me to answer? Gonna keep on keeping on. I can feel it in my bones.
Good evening. I am Reverend Mark Hughes, and welcome. You've caught us again here over at the Juxtaposition. This is the Juxtaposition, a Vermont Racial Justice Alliance monthly community television program here on CCTV, the Center for Media and Democracy, Town Meeting TV. Issues affecting black folks and black folks effecting change. And today, Backwards Day. The name of the program, Backwards Day. The 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution, the Second Reconstruction Amendment, was created to provide citizenship, equal protection, due process, and certain privileges and immunities for the formerly enslaved in 1968. Over the past 155 years, the Equal Protection Clause has faced plenty of backlash and resistance, and it scarcely has fulfilled its promise of equal protection for us, black folks. Now, the Equal Protection Clause is being turned against us. And it's challenging corrective and reparative economic policies designed to correct that the government policies that have caused some of these challenges. So I decided to name today's program Backwards. Is this Backwards Day? Because it seems like the 14th Amendment and specifically the Equal Protection Clause, in some ways, some days, it seems like it's just doing the absolute reverse opposite than it was designed to do. It's the state's responsibility to protect us where the federal government won't. We must amend the Constitution to make it so. So let's run a sanity check with a legal perspective. I am really proud and excited to introduce to you and to just reacquaint to some others our Professor Teachout, our own Professor Teachout, who's been down at the Vermont Law School for a long time. He's a professor there, is a constitutional law expert, and we go to Professor Teachout when it's time to learn more about the Constitution. So I'm blessed to have you here, sir. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Reverend Hughes. I'm happy to join you this evening. We can have a discussion. I agree with you that it is important to consider adding to the Vermont Constitution its own Equal Protection Clause, because there isn't one in the Vermont Constitution, and there never has been one. And I think both for purposes of lawyers and courts and the legislature, it's important for Vermont to make its commitment to the principles underlying the Equal Protection Clause.
Absolutely, but it is so incredibly dense. It is so complicated, and I don't mean to condescend, but you know, I as far as the subject matter expert is concerned, I really believe strongly that I got the guy here today. So if there's any questions, I think we've got some answers today, folks. But here's the thing: let's just unpack it a little bit for those who are watching, because in 25 minutes. We don't really have time. So first, the Equal Protection Clause was designed to protect black folks against discrimination from state and federal government. So this is where we want to start, the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment. Here, now, if we can't agree upon that, it's almost like the whole question about why was the Civil War start? If we can't get on common ground with that, then we're missing something. So I think we're there, and I think, like the 25 minutes that we have to talk about it severely limits the scope and the depth that we're going to really be able to get into this. But suffice it to say that the Equal Protection Clause, it has served It had as a source of our civil rights laws and leveraged to expand protection to a number of, and I'm just going to say classifications, and that's kind of like the little technical term that folks throw around. Over time, the Supreme Court of the United States, it there's a in a doctrine called basic analysis, and we're going to hit on that just a little bit, has issued a series of rulings that establish that for any governmental enactments that establishes preference, and we got to really hold that if it's a governmental enactment and it establishes preference for certain subsets of the community, or we'll call classifications, then there's going to be a requirement that the enactments, that they have to be what we refer to as being narrowly tailored. And the only reason I'm going through all this is so we don't have to talk about it anymore as we go forward, because I'm contextualizing the reasons why things have become so difficult to address. And then the other thing is there's this whole business of a compelling state interest, and that is to say that it must be demonstrated that there is a compelling state interest. This otherwise is referred to as strict scrutiny. There's additional requirements, as you know, for proponents who produce legislation that seek to correct past wrongs, to produce like a robust set of findings of the past wrongs, but they have to be sufficient to meet the compelling state interest, and that's where we start. And just to make sure that we are on the same page, Professor, am I going down the right path? And is there anything that you can add to that to make it clearer to folks who are listening?
Well, Reverend Hughes, you are right in going down that path. I don't know if we want to get into that complexity tonight, but the reality is the current United States Supreme Court has said that if a law discriminates on the basis of race, whether it discriminates against a historically disadvantaged minority, or takes the form of an affirmative action program which is designed to redress the effects of past wrongs, if it uses race as a basis for making a decision for providing benefits or disabilities, the court will apply the highest standard of scrutiny and require a state to come up with a compelling interest for doing so.
Or the federal government. Right.
Or the federal government. That's under the Fifth Amendment as opposed to the 14th, but the same standard exactly.
Exactly.
So the consequence is that the court struck down affirmative action programs that had been adopted by the University of North Carolina and Harvard University, aimed at bringing on board people who had historically been disadvantaged. They struck it down by saying it's a discrimination based on race. You got other ways of dealing with that problem. You don't have to discriminate on the basis of race to do so.
Gotcha.
Bottom line.
So in essence, it's also kind of like so-called reverse discrimination, because race is race. So I mean, so if a white person, like for example with the USDA, the policies of the USDA distributing these ARPA funds on the programs that are currently in limbo, these were white folks who went who took it through the court system and got this program that was designed for corrective purposes struck down using the 14th Amendment.
Let's back up on that one, because that's a very helpful example.
Yeah.
So the federal government looks out at the history of treatment of providing support for farmers in this country, and it said it's a pretty shameful record of history.
Right, yeah.
We have deprived black farmers of access to the same benefits that have been provided to all other farmers. So they then built in a program that said, let's try to compensate for that by giving black farmers some advantages that are not available to white farmers. And you're absolutely right. White farmers went into court, challenged it, and the court strikes it down because they say you don't need to use reverse discrimination to deal with this problem. I don't know how else you deal with it, but that's what the court said.
I'm gonna call it so-called reverse discrimination.
Well, I know, but but that's what the conservatives on the court call it. Discrimination on the basis of race, doesn't matter which way. But Reverend Hughes, you
just said something though a moment ago. You said the conservatives on the Supreme Court. Can you unpack that before you make your next point?
Well, on the current court, there are 9 justices. 3 are appointees from earlier administration, and they are generally considered on the liberal wing of the court. And the other 6 occupy different positions on the right wing end of the spectrum, from sort of center right to radical right.
In short, the court system largely, because the court system was infused with a bunch of conservatives over the last administration's term.
Over the last
However, as the pendulum swings throughout the arc of history, the vast majority of the history of this country, with the exception of the Warren Court, the Supreme Court has been conservative.
That is true. And
you're going to make another point too.
Well, I just, you started off by saying the Equal Protection Clause really was designed to protect recently emancipated slaves from all sorts of legal abuses
and physical
that fell short of slavery.
Right.
Couldn't enter into contracts, couldn't buy property, and so on. So it said,
couldn't live without getting killed.
Yeah, but one of the interesting things, that's true. One of the interesting things about the way that Congress went about drafting the Equal Protection Clause, it doesn't say equal protection is provided to recently emancipated slaves. It says,
no, it doesn't.
It says all persons are entitled not to be denied equal protection.
Oh, here we go. Now we get ready to get started. You said you were going to start something, but here's the thing. Here's the thing. Okay.
I do want to start.
Hold on for a minute. Hold on. So here's the thing: is we know, Peter, that the 13th and the 14th and the 15th Amendments of the United States Constitution, otherwise known as the Reconstruction Amendments, they were done specifically to counter the 7 points in the United States Constitution that institutionalized slavery, because we didn't have a constitutional convention.
That is
so
right.
we want to be careful not to take the 14th Amendment and specifically the Equal Protection Clause too far out of context. We know the language was a little bit vague. There was a little vagary because that's how white people with political and economic power do. But the thing is that the reason why it was done, the 13th, slavery, the 14th, equal protection, and essentially, if you think about it,
15th, give me the 15th. 15th talk about race?
Voting.
Does that talk about race?
Well, you couldn't vote if you weren't a person. That's what I was getting ready to go to, is that with the 14th Amendment, we were still 3/5 of a person before the 14th Amendment was institutionalized. So that was not just about equal protection. So anyway, I just want to clear that up. But here, let me tell you something about affirmative actions. Here's the deal. I'm glad we're doing this. We didn't plan this. We didn't plan. So we're going to get back on what we planned in a minute. But here's the deal. Affirmative actions, here's affirmative actions. The indentured servant, the African slave exchange, the 1790 Naturalization Act, free white persons, the 1830 Indian Removal Act, white settlement, the 1862 Homestead Act, 270 million acres of land distributed to white people, alien land laws, immigration restrictions, racial barriers to naturalized citizenship, white racial preferences on immigration, reneged follow-through on reparations, monetary compensation paid to slaveholders, the Jim Crow laws, the New Deal, Social Security Act, the Wagner Act, redlining, federal subsidies to suburban neighborhoods. So I think that right there establishes what I believe to be a contiguous pathway for the establishment of not just the creation of wealth, but the white middle class in America. So that's what's so troubling, and that's what's so challenging about what the largely conservative court has done for the vast majority of the history of this nation, because they're not just slightly schizophrenic, but they also have amnesia as far as what they've done in order to create the racial disparities across all systems of state and local government. You know what I mean?
Okay, so Mark, I think what you have just recited, all that legislation that was clearly discriminatory.
Wasn't strict scrutiny on it.
No. Okay. Okay. So all that happened with the Equal Protection Clause on the books. In place.
Yeah.
So what we can say is the history of the application of the Equal Protection Clause is at best checkered and maybe worse.
Plessy versus Ferguson?
I would want to stop and disagree with you a little bit because I began by saying the equal protection. Let me just add one point. You've forgotten to mention American policy toward people who wanted to buy homes after World War II.
GI Bill.
And
yeah, that was in there.
In which blacks were not having the same access to federal loan money that white folks were. So that history goes on. Now let me make a couple points. One, even though there is this shameful history of neglect or non-use of the Equal Protection Clause, that's not the problem of the Equal Protection Clause. That's the problem of the court that was not interpreting it in a way that it was intended to be interpreted when it was adopted.
Okay, stop there. So here, this is where we get to talk about the things we agree upon.
Yeah.
Because what you just said is a perfect setup for where we're going. For where we're going. Where we're going together, too, by the way. And I want y'all to know, too, we agree that there should be a constitutional amendment. What else do we agree upon?
We agree that there should be an amendment to the Vermont Constitution to add an Equal Protection Clause, so we have our own basis for adopting legislation dealing with the problems of systemic racism, dealing with a whole set of problems of discrimination that really are going to need to be dealt with effectively.
See, they thought we just came to argue. They thought we just came. They thought we was just here to just beat up on each other. No, we definitely agree, and I'm so glad too that we've had the opportunity to cultivate the relationship and have the conversations. And as we continue to unpack this, and to your point, I am in full agreement that that 14th Amendment is actually saved us. At some point, Brown versus the Board of Education and opening up the doors and putting us on a trajectory is, we know that this, and I'm going to say something that's going to be a little bit, uncomfortable, but this is a racist nation, okay? This is where we've come from as a nation. And the pendulum has swung over time. The arc of history has not been kind to us at some points. But one of the things that we can say is that we've always, over time, we've always had this on the books, and it could have been used if people with the right hearts and with the right minds were to apply it properly. It still could be applied. I'm talking about the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause. The only thing is, Peter, I really believe, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, is that today, and I think I'm looking for some tissue because I'm sniffly, but today, what we have is we have a kind of I'm going to say somewhat hostile Supreme Court, I'm going to say Supreme Court towards this element, because we know Roe versus Wade was just overturned, so on and so forth. And in short, I guess what I'm trying to say, buddy, is that during the Warren Court, the feds were protecting us from the state, and now it's time for the state to protect us from the feds. What do you think?
So, if I could make just two simple points. One, I agree with you that the Equal Protection Clause has not done the work that I think the framers of that clause intended for it to do. There has been a lot of backsliding, and there are a lot of problems.
Sound like church.
No, okay. But it's also important to know that the Equal Protection Clause has been used for very important purposes. It has been used, you've referred to the Warren Court. It has been used to strike down segregation laws, Brown versus Board of Education. But it also, because it's not framed simply in terms of racial discrimination, but in providing equal protection of the law for all of us, it has been used in a number of other contexts that are really important.
Preach.
It has been used to prevent or prohibit gender-based discrimination.
Same-sex marriage?
Maybe not as much as it could, but at least it has. It has been used to to prohibit discrimination based on gender identity or sexual preference, striking down, for example, a Texas law that made it a crime for homosexuals to engage in sodomy, but not heterosexuals. So it's been used to protect other groups. It's been used to protect the disabled, again, not as much as it could be.
Sparsely, yeah.
Yeah, but so to me, that's really important. I want a equal protection clause in the Vermont Constitution that is general in thrust, that guarantees equal protection to all of us, even though the problems that we currently confront are the kinds of problems that you have identified.
Thank you for that. And I'm down with that. And you do realize I'm a racial justice activist, though, right?
You're what?
A racial justice activist.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So, but here's the thing, though. Back to your point, is
But I've been one too.
I want to just embellish upon that, because it's such an important point.
Yeah.
Because the reason why we're where we are with this constitutional amendment right now is because the sponsor, she viewed it from an Equal Rights Act perspective. Now we're talking about gender, okay? But some other constituents, some folks that I've had the opportunity to talk to, they viewed it as an opportunity to protect LGBTQIA rights, to protect a future assault upon those rights, which is cool. And then we've already talked about the racial justice piece. The reason why this is so incredibly important, and like you said, whether it is assuring interracial marriage with Loving, or whether it's Claiborne with the Disabilities Act, whether it's is it Oglesburg? Say it.
Obergefell.
With the LGBTQI.
Same-sex marriage,
Or maybe it's Bush Gore.
Yeah. Well, we don't
because that was the 14th Amendment too.
Yeah, we don't.
But there's a broad and expansive use of the 14th Amendment, and I should say of the Equal Protection Clause, and I want to acknowledge that as we do the work to amend our state constitution. Yeah. So it also is all encompassing. Now, the shame is that, despite the fact, or maybe in light of the fact that, I don't know which way to put it, but it's hard to articulate because it's really skullduggery. Because the truth is that the Equal Protection Clause today is providing less protection to folks who it was originally intended to protect than it is for some of these other groups that we're talking about. And not that anybody deserves any less or any more, but it's just skullduggery that at the heart of systemic oppression, because this is a racist nation, and systemic racism does exist, and we've already proven that. We don't have to have that conversation anymore, that we lack the tools to address it. And so that's really, really frustrating. Let me just say that I think we've got maybe a couple minutes left, but here's the thing that I want to leave with you, and I want to leave with the audience. This is important to understand. The question that you're asking yourself is, what are you trying to do? And Peter, there's three things that you and I talked about off air. One is what we know is there are policies and initiatives that are being introduced, and some are currently in play, that are being threatened because they can't withstand the strict scrutiny, I guess is what I'm saying. Yeah. And so there's that. There's a category. So just think of it as three buckets, folks. This is what we're trying to do. It's three buckets. One bucket is that category of policies and programs that are just not coming out of the gate, or folks are very, very timid about getting them done because they're afraid of a constitutional challenge. That's one. The second one is that the question is, my friend, who are they coming for next? Right? You talked about, remember we talked a little bit about the affirmative action. We saw Roe versus Wade go down and crash and burn. Yeah. The question is who are they coming after next? So there's going to be, we know that on the trajectory, the trajectory that we are on as a nation, with a supermajority conservative Supreme Court, it's just a matter of time they're going to be coming back at us again. So there's that. And then the last category that I think is pretty interesting is to your point, is say for example, specifically the disabilities communities. The 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause is crap when it comes, well, I shouldn't say that, but it's horrible when it comes to protecting the civil liberties of folks with disabilities. It just is. And it's been like that all of the time. We've made a little progress, but this constitutional amendment will enable us, again, in this category, to expand upon the protections that currently exist. Yes. So those are the three buckets, I think, that we're trying to address. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think they are the three buckets. I have told you, I think there may be some limits.
Sure.
As to what we can expect from a state equal protection clause, because federal law is supreme over state law, even state constitutional laws. So if we tried to use that amendment to adopt, for example, in the area of racial discrimination, a really meaningful affirmative action program, it's likely that the Supreme Court would say that constitutes discrimination on the basis of race and strike it down. But otherwise, everything you say, I agree with 100%. My concern is just, I think it's okay to identify the groups that particularly need protection right now, but I want an amendment that will protect groups that we can't even imagine might need protection, say 20 years, 30 years from now.
I hear you. I hear you.
Do you think?
I understand.
Do you think other people don't suffer discrimination? What about people who have done prison time? Do they suffer discrimination?
We'll just have to amend the Constitution again.
They're not in your list or the draft list, right?
Well,
what about? Do you think we got a system of equal justice under law for all people, or is it equal
justice? Of course not. But what we don't want to do is
justice for rich people, right?
What we don't want to do is we don't want to get so focused on what we don't know and trying to reach out and cover that we lose the ability to cover that which we do know. And I think that right there, because what I call that back home is getting lost in the sauce. So here's the thing is I'm glad that you're here. I'm glad you came. I'm glad you're supporting this. And I'm also glad for your legal expertise, because this stuff is way beyond my pay grade. Way beyond my pay grade. You, my friend, and I'm going to brag on Peter Teachout for a minute before we leave, but you, my friend, what I've come to understand is you've been at the center of quite a few of these little rodeos, if you will. So I do appreciate your time. And your final thoughts on where we're going with this thing?
I just think what you have said today, Mark, is really important. That the heart and core of the equal protection in the federal Constitution was to protect people who had been enslaved and make sure they weren't continued to be kept in a position of social, economic, and legal subjugation. And the Supreme Court failed us for a long time.
Yeah.
It began to do some important stuff, starting with the Warren Court and a little bit before.
Right, exactly.
But that's the core area. But I just think there are other groups and other people that ought to be protected. If we're going to do an equal protection clause, I think every person in Vermont is entitled to equal respect and dignity, and we ought to provide them with legal protection.
I appreciate that, Peter. And the other thing, too, is that on the tail end of what we're doing, of course, just like the 14th Amendment, we want to have language in there that doesn't just permit us, but really compels us to create laws to enforce this, to be able to implement it, rather. And I think with those laws, just like the 13th Amendment, just like the 14th Amendment, with those laws, therein lies the reach that you're talking about. And then when that becomes beyond our reach, then we amend the Constitution again. We shouldn't have to do this very often, right? That's why it's so doggone hard to do, right?
I think it's good that it's doggone hard to do.
It's supposed to be. But I mean, as we continue to do the work, the racial disparities in the criminal and juvenile justice system advisory panel, the disparities report that we did in all systems, the racial equity executive director, the executive order, I think it's 1804, Act 33, which was the HEAC, and many, many, many other initiatives like the racism public health emergency, all of it with language saying, hey guys, we're here to eradicate systemic racism. I think all of this stuff has taken us on this trajectory, but I think little by little, they're being limited and some of them are running up against walls. As a matter of fact, the LALB's policy, you know, it was Robert Appel, I'm sure you know, who came in and actually had to write something that was narrowly tailored to be able to at least get us on the board with that. So it's a lot of stuff that's going on that we can do better on, that we will do better on, and we'll make more progress on. So thanks y'all who've come. Peter, thank you so much for coming out. Thanks for the time tonight. Thanks for everybody to come. This, again, we're here. This is Juxtaposition, issues affecting black folks affecting change. Good evening, y'all.